All right, I'm going to call to order this board meeting of the San Diego Community Power. It's May 26th and slightly after 5 p.m. Welcome everyone to our board meeting for the month of May. And before we start, I'm going to ask that we observe a moment of silence in respect to the victims of the gun violence and the horrible tragedy that happened in Texas, Uvalde, Texas. So please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. All right. Let's have a roll call.
Oh, we need to do that. Sorry.
All right, that's fine. Please join me in Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, justice for all.
All right, let's do a roll call.
City of San Diego representative. County of San Diego representative. Imperial Beach representative.
Present.
La Mesa representative.
Bill Baber, present.
National City representative.
Sotelo Solis, present.
Chula Vista representative. Encinitas representative.
Present, Joe Mosca.
We have a quorum.
All right, so I should note for the record that we are still holding our meetings remotely, but some of us are actually at our office and some of the board members are virtual. All right, so any items to be changed on any items to be added to the agenda or the agenda to be changed? All right, not hearing any. Let's move to the public comments, and this is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on any items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the board. Do we have any folks that want to speak to the board?
We have no hands raised at this time, and I don't believe we received any written comments.
All right, perfect. Then we'll move from public comment to consent calendar. We have 6 items on the consent calendar. Any questions or comments on the consent calendar?
None. Move 6 items from consent, Chair. Sotelo Solis.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second on that motion?
Bill Baber, seconds.
All right, we have a second on that motion. Megan, do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
There's no hands raised at this time, and we did not receive any written comments.
All right, let's vote on the consent calendar.
Director Baber, how do you vote?
Aye.
Director Dedina, how do you vote?
Dedina, aye.
Director LaCava. Director Lawson Reamer. Director Sotelo Solis, how do you vote?
Sotelo Solis, aye.
Chair Mosca, how do you vote?
Yes.
Motion carries with all directors voting yes.
All right, let's move to item number 7, and that's a presentation of the fiscal year 2023 operating budget. And our CFO, Eric Washington, is going to present.
Thank you, Chair Mosca. Good evening, directors. I'm Eric Washington, the Chief Financial Officer of San Diego Community Power, and I'm presenting item 7 of the agenda tonight with the recommendation to receive and file the presentation of a preliminary review of our fiscal year 2023 budget. By way of background in terms of budget development, we actually started the budget development process in January within the finance department at San Diego Community Power, rolling it out to the broader staff in February, where we framed our revenue estimates and our overall financial operating expense estimates, rolling into the development of our budget. So we then engaged staff, worked collaboratively to develop a baseline budget, which brings us forward to May today for a review of the proposed budget for fiscal year 2023. We'll come back to the board after a review by the Risk and Finance Management Committee of the final proposed budget prior to approval by the board. with the objective or the goal of having the budget approved and implemented beginning July 1st, which is the beginning of our fiscal period for 2023. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the items that contributed to our budget development for fiscal year 2023. We are giving additional focus for this fiscal period to community programs as we continue to build out our program staff to position our organization to start launching initial pilot programs. Contributing to our revenue for fiscal year 2023, we're excited to include the County of San Diego and National City as members of our program. We'll continue our efforts in terms of outreach through community events, sponsorships, and taking marketing and advertising efforts to continue to inform our customers about our program. Lastly, on the highlight, with the continuing increase in the cost of energy, we're giving attention to that for this fiscal period. We believe we budgeted adequately for it for the most part, but that's nevertheless an item of focus for our budget for this year. Next slide, please. There we go. So this slide is a representation of the sort of the top line summary of our budget, which we'll drill down a little further in the preceding slides. But as you can see from this in one of the graphics, the lower right-hand corner, where the cost of energy represents the largest expense item in our budget. And we've started to see some historic increasing or historically high energy costs over the past several months. Next slide, Kimberly. So wanted to just briefly highlight some key assumptions that contributed to the development of our revenue figure for this year's budget. So we're excited to announce that 7% of our revenue will come from our Power 100 customers as we continue to grow that portion of our product offerings. Our opt-out rates remain relatively low. Our participation rates are above, on average, 95%, with those opt-out rates remaining just under 5%. Again, we are contributing to this year's budget the enrollment of phase 4, which will begin during the first half of calendar year 2023. Next slide, please. As I alluded to just a moment ago with respect to increasing energy costs, just within the projected energy costs back in February compared to the most recent estimates in May, we've seen about a 7.4% increase in energy costs, equating to just under $44 million in energy costs. So that our exposure there is based on what we've hedged so far, and our power services team has done a great job in terms of hedging as best they can using the dollar cost average approach. So that's one way that we hope to mitigate that. Next slide. This slide represents essentially the budget categories that are included in this year's budget. Again, revenue being inclusive of the enrollment of phases 1 through 3, with anticipation of bringing in the County of San Diego and National City during 2023. The cost of energy, again, we're seeing historic highs in that area. Our professional services, we've allocated, we believe to be appropriately for our continued growth for the fiscal year. Our staffing, we're continuing to build out our staff. We're at 19 now. We're anticipating growing to probably over 30 for this fiscal period. Marketing and outreach, a portion of that is really allocated to the enrollment notices that have to go out. There's some compliance matters that are associated with that. General and administrative expenses are allocated, we believe, to be appropriately. And as I alluded to earlier, we are anticipating initiating some programs for this fiscal year's budget as well. So our target is to land at a net position of $9.2 million for fiscal year 2023, and that, of course, will contribute to our cumulative net position or reserves. Next slide, please, Kimberly. I'll apologize for this graphic. It's relatively small. I'm not sure how visible that is to the online folks or even the folks around the table. But this takes sorry, Director Baber, but this takes the previous slide and it drills down a little further, providing additional detail to the overarching 5 expense categories, as well as the cost of energy. And then, of course, with the top line revenue, where we allocate a 1% of gross to toward uncollectible accounts, which we believe is conservative, given that historic data supports half of 1% in terms of uncollectibles. But with the expansion of phase 3 and bringing in a large portion of the residential customers, we believe that estimate for the budget is appropriate. And then you'll find this slide along with narrative details in the attachment to this item in the board package. Next slide. And then lastly, we wanted to really kind of take a look at how we compare to some of the other community choice aggregators or CCAs. So we took a small sample of other CCAs, looking at their life cycle, where they are in the life cycle in terms of their launch dates, the number of accounts they're serving, the costs of energy, their non-energy costs, and then the projected net revenue for those CCAs. So as you can see, we measure most closely to one CCA, with our energy costs being pretty similar to that particular CCA, given the number of accounts relative to the others that we reviewed in this sample set.
That's a question.
Sure.
Do we have that data, not just cost in millions, but by unit, cost per unit?
We didn't analyze that data, but I believe we can obtain that data through Cal CCA.
At some point would be helpful.
Sir, yes.
Just in terms of the cost of energy for the other ones that are smaller, but it's less, is that because they locked in the rates earlier? Because I know usually if you had more rate, I would assume you had more accounts, it would be cheaper, but.
Well, I'm not exactly certain
Okay.
with regard to their hedging strategies, but I know the load, the size of the load that the various CCA service is a contributor to that. That's a variable to take into consideration.
You can't tell whether it's apples to oranges. Like Los Angeles Clean Power Lines could have just ginormous C&I customers that have a fairly large load compared to our customers. They have refineries on the coast and stuff like that.
Right. Now that's a great point, Chair Mosca. There's a good number of variables that would go into play for these CCAs. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation of the operating budget for fiscal year 2023 for receipt and file by the board. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, that was a very good presentation. Thank you, Dr. Washington. I have a question. In terms of the energy cost, you said that it's going up by 7.4%, which is about $44 million. And that's purchasing renewable energy. So just kind of curious as to, like, do we know if natural gas is going up on the market in an extreme way? Do we know how much, if we were like kind of purchasing traditional energy sources, do we know what that delta would be? Because I just out of curiosity, that it's going up by 7.4 and it's renewable, but what would it have been? What would folks experience if they were actually purchasing more fossil fuels or traditional sources of energy?
That's a great question, Chair Mosca. I do not have the answer to that, but I'd be happy to take a look into it to see how that might. That's a really good point.
Byron probably knows. Board Member Tadina?
I don't know, maybe somebody else has questions or comments. I can wait. Do they want to go?
No, go for it. I don't see anybody's hand.
No, first, I want to thank Dr. Washington. I was really impressed with the management of the finances here. I think, as I've said in our finance committee meeting, I think it's the finance committee meeting, right? That it makes our job easier to make sure that this organization is extremely well run in terms of the finances. So thank you, and every other realm. explain, maybe I should have known that already. The 1.7 million allocated to community programs next year, but is that how we're structured? So a certain percentage comes out of, where does that money come from and how's it allocated for the community programs?
The portion that's in the budget is actually allocated from our budget.
Okay.
And I think there's a presentation later
Our
that'll go
director.
into more.
Yeah.
Our
Okay.
director of programs
Okay.
will speak more eloquently and intelligently to that.
Okay.
So I'll defer to him.
Yeah, hopefully
I
the
just wanted
future
to-
will come from state funding and federal funding, but for now, we're seed funding ourselves.
But, and that again, it's like when we set up the JPA, was there like, did we say, percentage of net,
No,
so we have,
yeah.
okay.
There were some JPAs where I think that was like a real contention when they were setting up and trying to understand what each member agency would get back in terms of
Right.
community programming, but we haven't done that. But what we have done is with Calpine, we've hired a third party that's going to really do an analysis, kind of a master plan, if you will, of what are the needs of Imperial Beach
Okay.
from a community program perspective. And then we can ask Colin, director of our programs, when he's presenting, okay, what are we going to do? What is the vision? And then how do we actually finance it? So.
Well, I don't need to make a motion but I would just want to let you know, again, very pleased with the way that as a startup, this is proceeding. I know it's been very challenging, but I just want to, I'm part of our city, just want to thank you.
Any questions? Mr. LaCava, thank you for joining us. I see you there.
They move pretty fast. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Megan, are there any public comments on this item?
There are no written comments and there are no hands raised at this time.
All right, so this was just kind of a preview, and then we're going to get this item back before us. So this was a receive and file. So if there are no other questions or comments, we will receive and file this report and thank Dr. Washington for his presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, directors.
All right, let's move on to number 8, discussion on 2022 legislative platform and AB 2838, and update on legislative and regulatory items. And this item is going to be taken by our Director of Regulatory Affairs, Laura Fernandez.
Thank you all for the opportunity to present on our legislative platform tonight. This is a request from the last board meeting that we have a discussion about this tonight. I appreciate the idea of this policy platform is to serve as a guide when we engage in policy matters that are of interest to SDCP. Hopefully you all had a chance to review it since it's a fairly robust document, but if you haven't had a chance to, I'll just read the whole thing to you right now. I won't do that. But I will go over the major priorities as well as some highlights. So before I jump into that, I just want to be clear that having this approved platform ensures that we're able to act quickly as things can develop very rapidly, especially during the legislative session. And the goal of the platform is to provide authorization for us to take positions without going to the board in every instance. However, any position that might be contingent or part of a broad public discussion we'll bring to the board for discussion when possible. Having this platform also serves to communicate with our customers as well as policymakers regarding where we stand on matters. Next slide, please. So there's 3 major priorities in the platform. Those are accelerating deep decarbonization, and that includes electrification of buildings as well as the transportation sector, promoting local development, and stabilizing community choice. In addition to these major priorities, we outlined some general legislative principles, and I'll just go over some of those now. Next slide, please. So we'll support legislation that makes it easier for other cities and counties to form or join a CCA, and we'll oppose legislation that limits local decision-making authority for CCAs, such as in rate setting or procurement. Next slide, please.
Thanks for that. That's very nice to see. Very nice to see that. Thank you.
Sure. We will support legislation that enables communities of concern to have affordable, reliable, and clean energy. We'll support legislation that enables all communities to participate in deep decarbonization efforts. And we'll also support legislation that would reduce local air pollution, reduce other negative local impacts associated with energy production, and boost adoption of DERs in communities of concern. Finally, we'll oppose legislation that would have the potential to disproportionately negatively impact communities of concern. Next slide, please. With regard to environmental sustainability, we'll support legislation that encourages conservation of energy resources as well as development of dynamic load shifting capabilities, legislation and funding for renewable and advanced energy technology that increase efficient consumption, as well as legislation and funding for pilot energy and resource efficiency programs. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just like reading the last sentence. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Finally, with regards to local economic development, we'll support legislation that's consistent with our commitment to an inclusive and sustainable workforce. Legislation that enhances opportunities for CCs to promote local economic development through locally designed programs. I will support legislation to enhance development of local and regional sources of renewable energy, as well as legislation that enables CCs to collaborate with member jurisdictions on local energy resources and projects to advance environmental objectives. So this is just sort of a refresher of the policy platform, and again, that's not the whole thing, so there is a much more robust document that was included in the board packet, but we do want to bring it back for discussion if the board would like to talk about anything that's in the platform.
I'll raise my hand. First of all, thank you so much. This is really well done, and I know we had this in consent a while ago, and I think it's just important to force us to put it in front of our faces, so thank you. I just had one thing. I guess it's a kind of maybe something that we could look into as opposed to necessarily moving on it now, but maybe come back with what might be feasible. I think what's missing from this is support for legislation that, you know, basically looks at the true cost of carbon and ensuring that, you know, we're supporting policies that properly like allocate externalities, right? So that like, you know, environmental impacts are being taken into account in terms of externalities of energy production. I think we can talk more about that if this isn't enough clarity, but that's something I think is one of the most fundamental things that we can do on clean energy is just, you know, really doing the work to ensure that the true cost of carbon is reflected, as well as like sort of the true cost of any form of energy. And so we're ensuring that there's sort of the appropriate cost bearers are bearing costs instead of externalizing the costs onto the broader public. So I don't know if that makes sense or if we need to have a vote on it or something like that, but I think personally that seems like something would be really important to have as part of our ledge platform.
So, I mean, I think that's good, and I'm wondering, are you tracking everything that she's saying and how we can include that in our priorities? Because otherwise, what could happen is that you could work with Laura to kind of make sure that that we're including that, and it can come back as an amendment to our priorities. The other thing too is that on an annual basis, at least in the city of Encinitas, what we do is we have an ad hoc committee where we would basically have a couple of the city council members work with staff to update the priorities. And so we'll take another stab at this in the new year as well. But if you wanted to, you could work with Laura to make sure that the language that you wanted included is in fact included in the way that you want it.
Sure, I mean, if you guys want to do a draft and kind of shoot it to me, and we can work on it, and you can bring it back to the board for a proposal and a discussion.
Yeah, we could do it on whatever timeline you all prefer, so we can work on a draft and share it. I don't want to commit it soon, or we could wait till the next round.
I think it'd be better to do it soon because I think we should just make it common practice that every year we refresh ledge priorities regardless, because things shift.
Right.
So I think that's a great idea. It's sort of both and.
Okay,
Right.
We'll work on it.
Right. Although this session's almost done, and I mean there could be some bills that like are completely gutted and become something else and give Laura a headache for a while. But for the most part, the legislative session's done. But it could be done now, and that could even be kind of an amendment for even the next year. So, all right, Director Baber.
Laura, I have a dream. Someday in the future, this may be true. So I want to make a suggestion. Our legislative, perhaps it'll never happen, but we should support any legislation that modernizes or makes more transparent or more open the CUP, or reforms how they can lobby, or how they're processing. Anything that opens up that archaic labyrinth of policy would be good for us.
Those words exactly.
Yeah. I don't know that we want to step into that pile of controversy, but
we could word something around transparency in the regulatory arena. Is that what I'm hearing? Something along those
Yes. Yeah. However politically correct you want to make it, Laura, but you know, if you really want to move our regulation, improving that system would make it easier. So
I think there's some of us that would prefer to be regulated by the CEC too. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that would fall in that category too, Joe.
To how it is, but okay, that's good. I like the broader language. Director
I just have a question, Laura. So I know I should have remembered this from all the discussion on policy and some of the issues you guys worked on, but so there's an official alliance of or network or collaborative of CCAs, is that correct?
Yeah, we have a trade association, CalCCA.
So, and then we have a lobbying team, or is it,
Yeah.
you got, so they're up
And
in
we've also hired
Sacramento?
our own lobbyists.
And how do you feel about, I just, you know, the fossil fuel industry has a lot of influence in the state with legislature, which we saw recently with the offshore drilling sort of defeat. So how do you, are we confident that we've had a lot of things that we get where we want, or is it harder, or how do you feel about that?
I wouldn't say that I've seen the fossil fuel industry be our major opponent in Sacramento. Not yet.
That's good to know. It's good to know. And then Archaic Labyrinth should be the new Arcade Fire. So that should just be like a new indie band. So Bell, it's a great indie band. We'll make
That's
sure
a great idea, Serge.
I do think that Director Jadina's prior comment about our ability to oppose effectively or support effectively things that are important to this CCE and other CCEs around the state. And so I think that as we're basically bringing on board a lobbyist, that's important, and making sure that we're effectively advocating in San Francisco, in Sacramento, with all of the policymakers, that we're, with these priorities, that we're basically working with all of our member agencies. So like IB, when they're hiring folks to lobby on their behalf, they're saying these are our priorities as well. And when the county's up there in Sacramento, these are our priorities. So we're having that kind of multiplier effect. I think that's incredibly important.
You don't have lobbyists, it's just me or our council members. So yeah,
oh, you don't?
I get it,
all right.
sure.
So yeah, it's just you. Yeah, no. So I think that we do, in fact, kind of get that into the member agencies' legislative priorities to make sure that they're also helping us, and that we're carrying the message to all of our kind of associations, CalCCA, and also, any of the other, creating kind of alliances with the community choice energy programs within the county. And maybe even it looks like we're very similar to the Clean Power Alliance in Los Angeles and Ventura, so having some sort of alliance with them, but just building that kind of that ability to really kind of push our interests forward and educate policymakers, because I think that policymakers still are not as up to date on what we're doing as they may be with the IOUs, because the IOUs or the utilities have so many more boots on the ground in Sacramento.
Right.
And so I think that that's something that we're competing with.
Well, in the ocean conservation movement, we have Oceans Day, and everybody, and organizations will make an attempt to take folks from the communities up to Sacramento and teach people how to lobby, and that's something that we're always welcome to do. And or if we need to get our CAC members up for, there's a CCAJ, I don't know, whatever it is, but I think those are all good things to do to show our, to defeat all the oil lobbyists.
Right.
Chair Mosca, Director LaCava's next.
Director LaCava?
Yeah, I can see a CCA day in Sacramento, so I'm up for that. Laura, thank you for this material. I really love the way you've organized it and presented it. It makes it really understand. I appreciate the comments of our fellow members in response to this. The only question I had was, because I think the goal of this is to then adopt a policy which gives our CEO a direction to be able to just, with this platform in hand, to go out there. I was thinking about, and this is a little bit what you were saying, Chair Mosca, in terms of initiating or sponsoring legislation. We talked a little bit about that at the strategy session. Would those be embedded in these precepts, or would we talk about that as a board before we would try to sponsor or initiate new legislation?
Well, I want to defer to Laura on this, but I think that, I could see it. There are a couple different conversations we're going to have. One coming up with the strategic planning, where we task our staff with coming up with goals, and some of the goals could, in fact, be in this area of, these are our priorities, and how do we think about things that we want to proactively kind of sponsor and go after, because we see that specifically maybe because we're kind of in this cul-de-sac in San Diego, if you will, that, maybe other CCAs aren't properly kind of advocating for a certain position, and we see this gap and we really want to basically attack it. I think that the strategic planning session that we have coming up is one opportunity, and certainly the annual kind of review of the priorities and stressing what we actually proactively want to accomplish would be a good thing. So not only, are we going to oppose or support or stay neutral on certain legislation, but we also want to instruct our lobbyists to find a legislator to introduce certain legislation.
Okay, thanks. Makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so I think that's a conversation coming, right?
Yes.
All right. Good.
Chair, this is Sotelo Solis.
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you. I want to say thank you, Laura, for laying it out as my colleagues have mentioned. I know I had a couple questions at the last meeting, so thank you for your diligence. And again, since it was on consent, I'm really glad that we're able to bring it out and see it in all its glory. And then even just with this, with the strategic planning, I think it's good if there is something we want to carry. I mean, that'll be a feather in our cap, but we know that legislation to carry it takes a lot. And, since we're building our political capital internally, this may be where we lean heavy on the lobbyists, but also too, we want to make sure that we're pretty strong in our footing locally. And if there's anything we need to do to help build up that platform, I think we should focus on that as well. Because yes, it is a lot of regulations at the state level, but we want to make sure that if there's any policy that we need to support right now, by all means, please bring it to us by, boilerplate language where we can support via resolution, or any boilerplate language that we can send letters of support. By all means, I think that's really important that we also to keep at the forefront. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I mean, I do think that once we come up with the legislative priorities, that the member agencies, the representatives should bring it back to their member agency and have, however you guys set your legislative priorities for the year, we should get that included within, like, for instance, National City's legislative priorities, so that that's kind of marching order for your staff and for your lobbyists as well. All right. Any other comments or questions on 8?
Well, this was only part of my presentation.
All right. So just for the beginning of this discussion, any other comments? And Megan, do we have any public comments?
We have one hand raised.
All right, let's recognize that person.
Okay, Curtis Dowds, you should be able to unmute yourself and you'll have 3 minutes.
There was an effort a couple years back to basically get rid of the archaic labyrinth. In other words, to get rid of the CPUC. And essentially that implies confiscating the grid, making the grid a state property. I think any lobbyist that we hire needs to be familiar with what happened to that legislation and what we could do to revive it, because I think the future of CCAs is highly compromised by the fact that the IOUs own the grid and they're not your friends, for what that's worth.
All right. Thank you. Just to make it clear, we do not have in our priorities to call for the abolishment of the CPUC or anything like that. I think there was broad language that we would put in there in terms about transparency. I think that's good. All right. Let's go to the second part of your discussion.
Yes. Next slide, please. So at the last board meeting, we discussed AB 2838, and I was asked what actions CalCCA had taken on the bill. And the day after our last board meeting, CalCCA did send a floor alert where they communicated an oppose unless amended position on the bill. Since then, the bill did move to the Senate. It's going to be heard in the Senate Energy Utilities and Communications Committee on June 2nd. And CalCCA did inform me that they, and I actually have seen as of like an hour ago, the letter that they sent to the committee today, expressing their continued opposition to that legislation. And so I just wanted to provide that update since we had this discussion last time. Oh, and I also learned today that Sonoma Clean Power, which is another CCA in Northern California, also submitted an opposition letter to this legislation. So at the last board meeting, there's some questions about, who else was in opposition, what CalCCA had done, so I just wanted to answer those questions. And open it up for discussion if there were further, if there's anything else further on this bill the board wanted to discuss.
All right, does staff have a recommendation regarding this bill?
We previously sent an opposed letter on this bill.
Oh, we have sent an opposed.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
did. And we discussed that last time, but there were some questions around who else was in opposition, what CalCCA had done, and so I just wanted to provide the new information I had.
All right, any questions or comments on our position on AB 2838? All right.
Okay, next slide, please. And moving into the regulatory space, I just have one item to sort of provide some background on. This is a really fun acronym, VAMO, which stands for Voluntary Allocation and Market Offer. So we have an opportunity to secure voluntary allocations of PCI eligible renewable resources from SDG&E. These are resources that our customers already pay above market cost for, but we don't yet get to count them towards our portfolio. Next slide, please. So, no surprise here, this fun acronym came out of a CPUC decision last year. It ordered the IOUs to offer PCIA paying load-serving entities voluntary allocations of these resources, and then the IOUs have to sell any unallocated resources through an annual market offer process. So that's where you get the VA and the MO. And so now we have an opportunity to get some of these resources from SDG&E at the market price benchmark, which is established by the current market price in any given year, and that's the same price at what the PCIA is set. Next slide, please. So what's important to know is that the voluntary allocations are a slice of the IOU's entire PCIA eligible RPS portfolio, which means we don't have discretion over the resource mix. I like to say it's kind of like you baked a cake, you can't just take the eggs out. So this is sort of a trade-off in the regulatory proceeding to allow for an allocation without allowing the cherry picking of desirable resources from the IOU portfolios. The other important thing to know is that SDG&E's RPS portfolio does include PCC0 resources, and there is a risk of these resources would transfer as PCC3, which is unbundled RECs, but they would be charged to us at the PCC1 price. And what that means is that PCC3s, which are unbundled RECs, they're valued at a significant discount to PCC1, and they're discouraged by our JPA and are also difficult to remarket. So there's no action at this time, and as you probably figured out, there's some bleed over into the procurement space. So I see my dear colleague Byron has come on camera, but my job was just to sort of provide a regulatory background here, and I think that he's going to speak a little bit to it in his presentation also, but this was just sort of to give you all an idea of where this fun acronym came from and what the regulatory background is, and there might be further action on this later this summer. But I'll stop there. That's the end of my presentation.
So Byron, in your presentation, are we going to have a discussion at some point about the balance that we would want to achieve with this?
We will. We're still in the tee it up and kind of socialize phase of it today, but we'll be bringing that back to you all down the road.
Would this be a discussion that we would envision starting with the CAC, or I guess I'm thinking that it would be nice to start this discussion with our Finance and Regulatory Committee and or the CAC, just so that we can kind of start having that conversation about the type of mix that we may get.
Agreed. If that's to me, I certainly agree, and I think we may even I think we'll likely be scheduling an ad hoc contracts committee as well to review a number of contracting items in the next few weeks, and so I think we'd look to add that to that agenda as well.
Good. As long as we have enough discussion about it and conversation with the board and with all of our stakeholders and the public, I think that's good, and then we can achieve the right mix.
Agreed.
we're still on item number 8, so let's just close item number 8 out. Do we have any other public comment on this item? All right, so I'm going to bring it back.
Sorry, there are no hands raised. I apologize.
No problem. All right, so we've had the discussion, and I don't necessarily, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't really feel like we need a motion at this time. I do have some direction for staff to work with our with Director Lawson Reamer on amendments to our policy.
Would it make sense to sort of aim for bringing something back like August, September? Does that give you enough time?
All right, perfect. So that's proper as direction. So we don't need a motion on that. So we'll move to we'll receive and file that, and we'll move to item number 9, update on power resources. And Byron Vosberg is going to lead us in this discussion.
Great, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. A few updates on my side, no action at this point, but updates and including one on VAMO. Thanks, Laura, for handing it off. We'll pass the baton here across across items 8 and 9. Next slide, please. So you guys got most of this already, the fun acronym, the VAMO, the VAMO, call it what you want. But we are in this voluntary allocation process, the VA process of it now. And as Laura said, it's an opportunity to take a slice of resources from SDG&E's PCI eligible portfolio. Again, these are the legacy resources they bought on behalf of our customers before they departed. The one thing I'll add to what Laura mentioned as well is that we anticipated something like this would probably be coming. We just didn't know what form when we were negotiating with SDG&E it was this time last year. So in our long-term renewable contract that we reviewed with you all and you all approved, I think it was last August, and then we signed last year. There is a mechanism via which that allocation will flow through. So the long-term renewables will flow automatically through that contract. We probably won't need to review an additional contract, but we will obviously want to review with you, the decision we make in the election and the volumes to take. As Laura mentioned, there are a number of considerations. There's still some uncertainty in the process and the mechanism as well, but a number of considerations as well around compliance obligations that these renewables certainly could help us achieve value to our customers as well. They're already paying the above market costs of these resources, so there's some benefit there as well. Flip side, it's the whole cake, as Laura said, or it's the slice of the whole cake. So we can't just take the frosting, got to take the flour and the eggs with it too. So definitely worth good discussion coming up here before too long. I mentioned probably an ad hoc contracts committee, as well as, Chair, to your point, the CAC and then an FRMC review as well.
And so this doesn't include RA, which is what would be really valuable for us, right?
Yeah, that's right. Laura, feel free to correct me as I get back into the regulatory space here, but all of this came out of a much larger proceeding at the PUC or in the PCIA, power charge indifference adjustment. That's the exit fee. In that proceeding, there was this working group that kind of worked to allocate everything from the IOUs to the CCAs. There was broad consensus on an allocation that would have included RA, but it seems like the IOUs and the PUC, the IOUs basically, well, we're involved in that, but the PUC ruled against it and just adopted the renewable portion as well. There have been legislative efforts as well to further something to those lines. Those have been unsuccessful as well. So we are in the renewable space now. We'd love to get the allocation of the capacity as well, but it seems like it's a tougher item for the IOUs to give up.
Thank you.
So that's all I have on VAMO. I'm happy to take questions at this point or at the end of the presentation, but a couple other updates for you all.
Director LaCava, do you have a question on VAMO?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Any questions? I'm nearsighted, so I thought when you leaned in, I thought you were raising your hand. Sorry. All right, let's move on.
Great. Next slide, please. So this is a late breaking item as well, just an update, and we like to celebrate victories here as well as we move along with it feels odd. We're already in May here. We're looking back to 2021, but our power source disclosure reporting, we've just completed it this week for filing with the CEC next week. So just wanted to share it with you all that it wasn't included in the staff report as it's just been completed this week. But high level, the power source disclosure is reported to the CEC on June 1st of each year for the previous year. There's a lot of paperwork that goes on associated with our contracts and our renewable energy deliveries and receipts, and then a lot of verification. So we've completed that now for 2021. We're filing the report to the CEC, and then that kind of goes to the CEC. After they review it, it comes back to us, and then we'll review again before we formalize the power content label. We'll review again with with you as our board before then including that power content label for distribution later down the road. So high level, that's why we're here. It always feels funny that we're in the middle of the year talking about last year while we're already looking forward to 2022 again. But we're again finally have final numbers for 2021. So that's the high level background. If we can go to the next slide, please. And these are, again, it's not filed yet and it's not approved. So we want to be really clear with the watermarks that these are still drafts. And I'm really sorry that these are eye charts. As I look at it here, it's very small. But the high level takeaway is that last year in our first year of service, we had a renewable target of 50%. 50% renewable content for our Power On product. And as you can see on the right side of the screen, we came in on the Power On program at 54.9%. So we ended up being a little conservative, and then actually had a couple contracts over deliver as well. So we ended up at 55%, so exceeding our targets by almost 5%. And then we have an additional target as well for a 5% incremental carbon-free targets that we end up being about 55% renewable and carbon-free. The carbon-free, same thing. We aired a little conservatively and then had some contracts come in a little higher than expected as well. So we ended up instead of 5% at 11%. So we're the total renewable and carbon-free target, which was 55%, we're actually achieving 65% in 2021. So first year out of the gate. Again, that's for our Power On product. On the left side, the Power 100. No surprises there. Power 100, we achieved 100%, and it's a split of solar and wind. So just wanted to share that, make you all aware we will be filing this, and then you'll see these numbers again as we bring the power content label back as well. Next slide, unless there are any questions or comments on that, next slide is an update on an RFO that we will be releasing tomorrow morning for clean, firm renewable energy facilities. There's a little bit of regulatory background here as well. Apologies, I should have had Laura tee me up for this as well. But there's a procurement mandate. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this midterm reliability procurement mandate at the PUC, looking to bring new clean resources online between 2023 and 2026. With a number of fossil and nuclear facilities retiring, there's a push, obviously, to make sure we have sufficient capacity online over the next few years. So we have, as an LSE, as a load serving entity, we have our own obligation of that. And in all, there's 11 gigawatts of ordered procurement across the state. It's broken into a bunch of different categories, so we can get into that maybe in a separate primer on this whole presentation or on the whole proceeding. But there's one category of it that's considered a long lead time item, and that's this clean, firm, or firm zero emitting resource, which is there's some pretty specific requirements. It's got to have a capacity factor of at least 80%, so delivers 80% of either 80% of the hours throughout the year, or on average delivers at least 80% during all hours of the year. Must have no energy storage associated with it and no reliance upon weather or intermittency. And so as we read through it, we're likely looking here at geothermal and bioenergy resources. It's not called out or carved out specifically, but it looks like it's basically an effort by the PUC to introduce more clean, firm resources, which again are likely to be bioenergy and geothermal. So these need to be online by 2026. It is considered a long lead time here as well, because we haven't done a whole lot of geothermal or much bioenergy development in the state for a while. So it's kind of I think the supply chains, the developers, and all of their associated efforts involved in bringing the supply on in the next few years may take a little longer than solar and storage, which is roaring throughout the state. So our target in this I guess procurement order is right around 40 megawatts for this clean, firm product to be online by 2026. So we're getting out ahead of that, releasing an RFO tomorrow, and then we'll have offers due in July, kind of run our standard process through that. Staff and ad hoc contracts committee will review, then we'll, assuming we find something we shortlist or select to negotiate, and once negotiated, we'll come back to the FRMC and the board for execution. So this is kind of a for awareness out ahead of the RFO. It'll be going out, so you're all aware. If you have any friends in the geothermal or bioenergy space, please send them our way, and then we'll be bringing proposals, I guess, to the committees to review, and then probably in a few months we'll be bringing contracts, hopefully, as well. So that's it for my update on these items. Happy to take questions or any comments.
All right, well, thank you for the presentation. Some good news and some challenges that lie ahead. So any questions for Byron? Any questions or comments? Megan, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do have one hand raised. Curtis Dowds, you should be able to unmute yourself and you'll have 3 minutes.
I just have a question. Is storage a line item in what you're obligated to secure? Looking at the line items and what you were presenting for the different, the power on and the other one, I didn't see storage as a line item. How does storage fit into that?
Good question. Thank you. Byron, did you want to take a stab at that question?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Chair, if you'd like. Sure. So there are a number of different categories, and most of them are clean capacity. Basically, it's fossil-free capacity. So energy storage does qualify for a number of them, and so we will be procuring towards a number of those other targets as well. It's kind of carved out explicitly from this one of the smaller items as well. But there are, in this long lead time category, there's also another similar to the geothermal long lead time, the clean firm long lead time requirement. There's a similar one for long duration storage as well. So we will probably be out for long duration storage again before long, and then as well as other resources that are just more general or generic, either renewable or battery storage capacity.
Does that get included on the profile? The content?
Which the content from standalone storage?
The slide that you just showed before about the load profile that we have, did we capture that somewhere where we're telling the public, what level of storage we have?
Storage typically isn't on the energy on the power source disclosure, because it's not technically an energy generating resource. So as it stores and delivers. So it's not the power content label and the power source disclosure are really just for the energy purchases themselves.
Right.
But certainly for a hybrid resource that's solar plus storage, that then would qualify as a renewable resource on the power content label.
Perfect. I wanted you to say that because I think that's what he was asking as well. So
great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, this is a receive and file, so we'll receive it and file it. Thank you, Byron.
Great. Thank you all. My pleasure.
Thank you. So we'll move to item number 10, update on customer energy programs. And our director of programs, Colin Santulli, is here with us.
Thank you, Chair Mosca. You can go to the next slide, please. We are going to do a quick overview of our programs. And the first few slides I'll move through rather quickly because you've heard about them before. We can save more time for the updates at the end. I did want to mention, though, we do have 2 existing programs, the net energy metering and our feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff launched in March, and we've had several inquiries, but no applications yet. We are expecting to reevaluate the program at 6 months. So later this summer, we'll be looking at that, assessing participation, and really kind of looking for areas for opportunity, and definitely we'll be engaging with industry at that point. Next slide, please. A few programs that we have actively under development now. You've heard about these as well. This is our disadvantaged communities green tariff and our community solar green tariff. These are the Public Utilities Commission funded programs to provide discounted renewable energy to eligible customers on the care and fair rates and those living in the disadvantaged communities. We reported earlier this year that last year, in November of 2021, the PUC allocated 14.39 megawatts of capacity to us for the program. So when we launch, we will be the largest program in the state, or the potential for the largest program in the state, which we are excited about. Our next steps for these 2 programs are, we're anticipating to file our application advice letter in October of this year. We likely wouldn't serve customers until much later in calendar year 2023. would be aiming for the program to start early 2023, but we need several months for the resources to come online and be developed. We're requesting 2 full-time positions in next year's fiscal year budget to support the program, which again would start in the beginning of calendar year 2023. And those staffing expenses are all fully reimbursable by the PUC. Next slide, please. And the next update is of our community power plan. And we provided a detailed update in March to the
I just want to say that the program you just went through sounds amazing. I'm super excited about it. That's awesome. So
yeah,
let's just take a moment. That's great. Let's invest money and then like help people in our communities. So it's a really great. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to stop for questions, Chair Moscow. I'll just defer to you on whether we should keep moving and take questions at the end. But I completely agree with you, Supervisor.
I have a question. I just want to say, like, let's acknowledge how great that is.
Yeah, and as far as acknowledgements go, Sebastian Saria has been putting in tremendous work on that program. It is to kind of in reflection on the comments about the Public Utilities Commission, it is a lot of effort to get that program up and running. But there's a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, if you will. So really big benefit to our customers who
do we feel like
need
we're
the most.
Getting it? And if not, is there anything board members can do to be helpful?
No, I don't believe that there's any barrier to us receiving it. Receiving the allocation was one of the is kind of the big first step. So we've been given the allocation. So now it is on us to go through the process, the steps, if you will, at the PUC to make the application and then start engaging with industry to get the resources developed in our territory. So more details to come when we do submit that application later in the fall. We'll definitely include it in a future update with some more details.
Thank you.
Sure. So for the community power plan, like I mentioned, we provided a very detailed update in March, but I did want to include it here because we've kicked off the project just this month with our consultants, Arup and Kearns and West. And a review of the timeline you see here this summer, we'll be working on the community needs assessment and the market assessment concurrently. And that community needs assessment, if you remember, that consists of partnerships with community-based organizations to do some very deep community listening sessions. We are intending to compensate those CBOs for their support and their time in helping us make sure we get good participation in the listening sessions. Those listening sessions, along with some additional stakeholder interviews, you can think of those almost as kind of early focus groups. And that information is going to feed into a much broader information gathering effort that's going to be, it's going to include surveys that we would hope to get support from the board and the advisory committee to help us get the word out. But then also really hitting the community events hard to make sure we are including residents in the engagement process who typically wouldn't necessarily respond to a survey or have the opportunity to provide their input on their energy needs. So we definitely are, I know several of you have mentioned that you're willing to connect us with community-based organizations in your community. And now is the time. Staff will be following up with you all this week, and as we are with community advisory committee members, and we appreciate connections that can be made. We want to make sure we're not leaving anyone behind as we embark on this pretty big engagement effort. On the goal setting workshops, we are also going to be doing a goal setting workshop with the board and with the advisory committee. It'll really allow us to kind of get into some of those details. I know that Mayor Dina mentioned it, it was referenced earlier about the priorities of the board for your individual communities. There's a chance we'll be able to do that goal setting workshop as part of the June 11th meeting. It's very relevant, but if it's somewhat last minute in the planning process with that. So if we're unable to do that on June 11th, we'll look to schedule a separate meeting with you all and then potentially separate one with the advisory committee as well. So as we move through the process here, we're going to be also concurrently, as I mentioned, working on a market assessment, and we'll come back to the board probably with our consultants to do an update specifically on that. And then let those two assessments lead into this program prioritization framework, which leads into program ranking and then our plan development. And our goal here is to have a draft plan in early 2023 for public comment, and then future adoption shortly thereafter.
And then will that plan have actionable items that you're going to be able to implement, and then a timeline of how that would be implemented, and then would we then have that, Karen, included in our strategic planning document, or how does this get within your work plan?
Yeah, so good question, Colin. I don't know if you had already thought through that. You're welcome to answer it.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, the program, the end result, the final plan will be about a 5-year roadmap of programs, and it'll layer in kind of available funding, and it'll help us identify when we should be rolling out which programs. So ultimately, we're going to get more or less a short list of programs based on all the feedback, anywhere from 10 to 15 programs that we should be prioritizing. And that we'll have a schedule on when we think we can roll those out. And it's very relevant to the next topic here on our funding sources. So that will get folded into kind of our annual work plans as we're looking to ramp up those individual programs.
But when would it come for us to adopt in early 2023, come with a proposal?
Yeah, so we'll bring a draft plan to you all in many updates along the way, but we're hoping to have a draft plan open for public comment in early 2023. And then we're hoping to treat it like a very open process, leave that, take feedback from the board, the advisory committee, also have a public comment period, and then incorporate feedback and then bring back a revised final plan for proposed adoption, probably in the March timeframe would be ideal.
Can I just add sort of 2 requests and suggestions in the broader process here? I think it'd be helpful if you scheduled a couple, not just one, but sort of iteratively a few, prescribe how many, but a few one-on-ones with all the board members.
Absolutely.
Get our input on what kind of programs we want to make sure we see, and also let us know what's emerging as part of like what's coming and keep us abreast, because I think this is something we all care about. So it's sort of a two-way street, both for us to give you input, but also for you to let us know how it's going. I think those are some one-on-one board conversations that would be helpful to have along the way, so that by the time you do have the program ranking and plan development, you've been able to kind of incorporate board feedback. So when you get here, it's already like reflecting that. So that would be one hope that we can make sure happens. And I think the second thing would be to do something similar with the members of our advisory body as well, to give them the same opportunity to just get updated on where things are at and give some input. And I personally will be really interested in tracking like where the ideas are coming from. So not just what ideas have emerged, but where they came from, like which communities, which stakeholders. I think that will be really important for me to sort of better understand what's representative of different communities, and like be able to take these ideas into account in a way that understands who's speaking, not only what's being said. So that has to do with when you come to meet with us and do our one-on-ones to to kind of present this information, not just like these are the ideas, but these are the sources of the ideas, and this is how much support they had, in addition to like this is the ideas. Does that make sense? Yes. So I don't know if you need any kind of formal direction, but that would be, I think, very helpful for me in making sure we get to a plan in March. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I think those are good suggestions. And then the other thing too is that we have some rock stars in our cities and member agencies that have been a part of this process from the beginning, that are really focused on what needs to happen in our member agencies. So I can give you some of the names to folks that have been around the table in Encinitas, but I think kind of having conversations with them as well would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple responses here. That we absolutely will be coming back to board members with along the way. I think we have scheduled 3 kind of touch points, formal touch points with the board, along with our consultants. And when we bring those touch points, we'll be having staff reports that are going to kind of show all the data and all the research that we've gathered throughout these various steps. So definitely open and would love kind of very deep engagement from you all and participation to the extent that you're able to give it. And the one-on-one kind of sessions, I'm very happy to do those, and I'd like to be able to follow up with you on those. And additionally, that we have that goal setting workshop that I mentioned. That was scheduled as a group session, mostly for efficiency, but if it works better to do small groups, we'd be happy to do that as well. Whatever we can do to make sure we're getting full information from all the board members.
All right.
Yeah, I think the request I'm making is that it's not just at the formal board meeting, but that there's one-on-ones and kind of deeper engagement prior.
Absolutely.
So
and then
I was thinking this is a lot to accomplish within that early 2023. But we've retained the services of an outside consultant as well to help us with this, and so they must have folks that are outreaching to some of our stakeholders and board members to get a lot of this input.
Yeah, right now, so we've hired Arup is the technical consulting firm that's going to lead the effort, and they're partnered with Kearns and West, which is a local firm here who's working with the county right now on some of their engagement work, and Arup's actually working with the county on some internal sustainability work. So they're a very well qualified team, and they've hit the ground running. We were on the phone with a couple of your member agency staff this week.
Yeah, all right.
Great.
Yeah, we're hitting the ground running. And just to the point about the advisory committee, as a reminder that we have 2 members of the advisory committee who are an active part of the project team. So we have obviously weekly team meetings with the consultant, and the advisory committee members are really volunteering their time to be deeply involved in the project. So we're feeling very comfortable and confident that at the end of the process, this is going to be really a shared document that the advisory committee is going to have as much ownership of as the staff, and we hope that the board is going to feel the same way too. So thank you for the comments and suggestions. We'll make sure we incorporate that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Do you need any kind of formal motion on that?
I don't think so. I think it's just kind of, we're just giving feedback, and I think your feedback's taken, right? Yeah.
You guys, one more slide.
Did you want me to wait for the question from Director LaCava?
Oh, I thought, yeah, I'll wait. Let me wait.
Director LaCava, I apologize. And then the hand that you raise is really kind of blending into the background.
Okay, well, I'll do this. I'm sorry, Colin, I thought you were done with I can wait till you're done with your slide.
I have one more slide. It's a bit of a meaty one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so lastly, this is very relevant to what we were speaking about earlier. And this is an update on upcoming funding opportunities that we've been evaluating for several months now. Just for some background, we presented on some of these options last September. And then I know that the Regional Energy Network came up, I believe Chair Mosca brought up at the end of our Community Power Plan update in March. And then, of course, this is very related to item 7 and the comments from Mayor Dedina. So it's very front of mind for many of you, and it's also front of mind for us at the programs team and kind of staff-wide at SDCP. We want to be able to set ourselves up to implement programs as soon after as possible when the CPP comes up with that portfolio of programs. So we do know that we're going to need a mix of funding to support all the programs that are going to come out at the end of the CPP process. And we expect that some of the funding sources, especially those that are coming from the state and the CPUC, they require a fairly lengthy administrative process to go through to actually access the funding. Now, we want to be, as I mentioned, we want to be in a position to more expeditiously launch the program. So we're starting the administrative processes now for those funding opportunities. Additionally, besides jumpstart and start the process for applying for the funding, the community needs assessment portion of the CPP. It's going to do, as I mentioned, a pretty deep dive on market data, and it's also going to provide a lot of customer information. And that information will be really helpful for us as we're going through the application process for various funding. So we want to leverage that community needs assessment engagement process now so that we can reduce the cost and the time when it comes to developing the PUC applications. If we were to do them sequentially, obviously there'd be more time, but also kind of more cost. And so, yeah, one of the attempt here is really going for efficiency with these funding opportunities, focusing on them now. So of the funding opportunities that we've examined, we've identified 2 that are the preferred options to access CPUC energy efficiency funding. The first is the elect to administer model, or the ETA. This is, relative to the other models, the least administratively burdensome method to access this funding. And it is fairly common with CCAs. I believe there's 9 CCAs that are currently administering or are actively pursuing the CCA model. The application process can run anywhere from 9 to 12 months, depending on how much time we're able to put into it versus a consultant supporting us. And then obviously when the application is completed, we do go through the PUC approval process. For the elect to administer funding, the PUC approval process is relatively short because this is really supposed to be looked at as somewhat cookie cutter. And so that's the good part about it, being that the application process is relatively shorter and the approval process is also relatively shorter than other models. The flip side of that is there's a fairly restrictive cost-effective requirement that comes with this funding. That cost-effective requirement is not uncommon with the PUC energy efficiency funding, but it can make it difficult to kind of think creatively about program design. And really, it actually can help, it limits our ability to reach hard to reach customers with this specific funding, because some of those customers made more money for. So like I said, it really takes a lot of the creativity out of the program design, but it also takes creativity out of the application process and makes it a much more expeditious process. This funding is definitely valuable. We've seen a lot of other CCAs look to C&I customers to create demand response programs. So we do think there's value there. It's just pretty targeted. The funding is determined based on a formula. So it's, like I mentioned, it's pretty cookie cutter, very specific. We expect it to be less than $1 million per year, and that amount of funding is decreasing over time. But given kind of all the variables, we think it's a good opportunity for us to do that, kind of target those very specific customers, potentially C&I customers, and given it has a relatively easy application process. The next funding opportunity that we're recommending is the Regional Energy Network. And when we kind of think about the spectrum of funding opportunities to access this kind of public funding, the Regional Energy Network is really at the far opposite end of the spectrum in many ways as the elect to administer option. So there's only 5 regional energy networks in the state. I think actually there's only 4, and the 5th one is under kind of final approval right now. They really no two are alike. This is the opposite of cookie cutter, like I mentioned, the other end of the spectrum. They all vary on geographic size, and they vary on the number of people served and the types of customers served. And they really vary on governance structure as well. Some of them are counties, some of them are councils of governments, some of them are literally dozens of counties. So like I mentioned, it's not a cookie cutter approach at all. Because of that, the development time is significant, and it's a pretty significant level of effort. It can take upward of 2 years before we could see funding coming out of a process like this. And then the PUC process after we submit an application is also more time intensive than the ETA process. So we're hoping to get some efficiencies with, like what I mentioned before, with leveraging our community power plan engagement process now to cut down some of that time frame, but it is a significant process. The flip side of that is that these aren't cookie cutter programs at all, and they really are looking to be. And one of the ways they're able to do that is that there's no cost effectiveness requirements with REN programs. They encourage cost effectiveness, but it's not a requirement. And like I mentioned, that's the opposite of the ETA model. So you really have that flexibility, and RENs, they are established by the PUC to, among other things, to fill gaps in existing programs and to serve customers that the IOUs don't intend to serve or aren't serving now. And many times those are these hard to reach customers that I just mentioned that the ETA models aren't able to serve. And a lot of those customers are likely the same customers that we've talked about as an organization, being the customers to date have not participated in the clean energy economy and who we're trying to bring along in this transition. So we look at the REN as being a really good opportunity to get funding from the state to target those specific customers. The other kind of opposite of the ETA with the REN is that the funding is not by formula. Like I mentioned, it's the funding amount is really whatever you can justify as an applicant. It's difficult to give estimates on what is possible because, like I mentioned, no two RENs are alike. But it's safe to say the several existing RENs are receiving in the tens of millions of dollars annually. But there's a big caveat that they're all serving different types of customers. Some areas have two RENs, so there's overlapping. So there's real potential here. And we need to dig into it to understand what that potential is. So those are the two preferred funding opportunities that we're proposing moving forward with. And I do want to mention before I talk about next steps, there's more detail in the staff report, but we did look at or evaluate another funding model for the same PUC or energy efficiency dollars or similar dollars. That model is called the apply to administer. We deemed it inferior, specifically relative to the REN, because the ATA or the apply to administer model does come with that cost effectiveness requirement. So you have that challenge of being creative with many of the programs. We've also heard that it's fairly significant from a reporting and management standpoint. It's a much larger program portfolio that you're required to propose. And then lastly, compared to the REN, down here in San Diego, as you all know, we don't have a regional energy network, and we are quickly becoming one of the few areas in the state who does not have one. There's a few counties up in the very far northeastern part of the state who are not covered by a REN now or won't be covered when the fifth REN gets approved here shortly. But we are by far the most populous part of the state without a REN and not accessing these dollars and this funding opportunity. So as I mentioned, we think it's a really good opportunity and one we should explore further. So with that, the next steps would be pending the approval of the related expenses that would support this in the proposed fiscal year budget. We'd be moving forward with a competitive process to bring in a consultant who would help us finish our research and do that really final consideration of options, and then ultimately start with those application processes that I mentioned. And we'd also have proposed an additional staff member to help manage that application process, and then also help with getting the programs off the ground. And in the future, there'll be significant more staffing, but also those are also PUC staffing expenses that get reimbursed by the PUC. So that's the end of my update, but happy to answer questions on any of the items.
And will we see in our strategic planning, will we see the going into next fiscal year, the focus on building out a REN or starting the process?
That's what we're discussing here today. So we're proposing both to go down the elect to administer model and the regional energy network model. We need to bring on a consultant to help us really kind of think through some of those difficult questions like governance style or governance structure. But that's what we're proposing here today, yes.
Would we work with our CC up north, Clean Energy Alliance? Because I know that when you look at the cities that they represent and some of the potential cities that they could represent, like Escondido and Oceanside, I think a REN would be extraordinarily helpful for them. And so I'm wondering if we can kind of look at this in a kind of collaborative lens.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been having discussions internally about that question. The governance structure really is how we structure the organization, and it'll be a balance of how we can kind of move quickly and to make sure we serve our customers in an efficient way, but also being collaborative, like you mentioned, in the region. So that those governance structures are still to be determined. This is really just the first step to help us bring on a consultant to do our due diligence and look at that in more detail.
All right, so it wouldn't be a REN for just like SDCP territory. It would be a REN for the region, and others could participate in that REN.
Yeah, we haven't made any final decisions. Obviously, we'd be bringing any final decisions to you all to make. This isn't a point to be talking about final decisions, but I think that is definitely one of the options. And it potentially not just CEA and SDCP, but there's other areas of the county that still wouldn't be included in those two. So there's still some decisions that we would have to make But kind of the early steps would be to bring on a consultant and to help bring in staff to help us do our due diligence and look at that structure.
All right, well, great, thank you. Excellent presentation. Any questions for Colin? Any questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair, just real quick, Colin, thank you, great presentation. I just wanted to circle back, beginning of your presentation about the feed-in tariff.
Mm-hmm.
4 months old. Are you sensing anything, learning anything in these first few months?
We've had inquiries, like I had mentioned, but we haven't had any applications. So we're at 3 months. And so I don't know that we are, we're necessarily worried, but we did, when we launched the program, we did commit to come back at 6 months. We think it's necessary to give that full time for, to be able to come back and look at reevaluating. We've done a fair amount of outreach to try to get the word out there that the program exists, but there's always more that we could be doing. And so we'll probably make sure we're focused on that in the next 3 months, so that when we come up on that 6 month mark, we can be hopefully looking at assessing participation and before we're thinking about changing any program rules or requirements.
I look forward to that update at the 6 month point. Yeah, it's too early, so I just thought I'd ask. So. Okay, thanks, Colin. Thank you.
Any other questions? Megan, do we have any members of the public that want to comment on this item?
We have no written comments and there are no hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you. Joe, that was a really good question about the feed-in tariff program, and it is highly successful in with other CCAs, and so certainly, in 6 months, when you bring it back, where do we go from there in terms of analyzing? I mean, my fingers are crossed that it's going to be highly successful in the way that we've kind of built it out. But if it's not, who are we kind of talking to about making changes to the program so that it is going to be successful and more folks enrolling. Right. So anyways, those are just comments. And if there are no other questions or comments, this was a receive and file, so we'll receive and file. Yes.
Chair, sorry, we do have a hand raised at this time.
Perfect. Let's recognize that person.
Curtis, you should be able to unmute yourself and you'll have 3 minutes.
On the feed-in idea, is that can residences apply to that kind of thing, or is this for commercial entities or industries to subscribe to? Can you jump out of net metering into a feed-in if you're a resident?
They're quite different. Curtis, is that your entire public comment?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Curtis. Colin or Byron, did you want to take a stab at maybe just high level stuff? Just high level.
Yeah, I would say that they're quite different. Not to take your words, but potentially one of the best things I could do would be to provide a resource where we had a public webinar that describes the feed-in tariff, and that could be a good resource for Curtis to get all of his questions answered. But in short, they really are looking at two different audiences. They're two different policy mechanisms to try to increase local generation. So it's not a vision that a resident who had rooftop solar would switch from a NEM to a feed-in or back, if that helps.
It's mostly going to be commercial applications and not residential applications, unless you have a tremendous amount of square footage on your rooftop. It could be, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. So we'll receive and file that. And now we'll go to reports by our CEO and General Counsel. CEO.
Nice. Good evening, everyone. I've just a quick update, some general updates on my end. So I've had some really great conversations over the last few weeks. Been here a month and change now, and I'm really grateful for the support that everyone has offered and how invested our communities really are in SCCP success. Since the last board meeting, I've met with everyone on our staff, several CEOs from both Northern and Southern CCAs, many of our board members, the chair of the CAC, senior SCG&E staff, the Cal CCA, lots of industry partners. So in the weeks to come, I'm also meeting with each of our CAC members, with several local academic and industry experts and labor associations, and exploring more of our local communities throughout San Diego. It's been a busy month, but I'm really excited by the energy, the support, and the enthusiasm that everyone has shown towards our mission. So that's what I've been up to. I'm also excited to announce that we have selected an HR firm that will bridge us from where we are today to the time when we have a full-time HR director on staff. We are finalizing the contracting now, and so we hope to have them on board by next week. So we'll announce probably at the next board meeting what progress we've made and who they are. Our strategic planning process, we've talked a little bit about that today. That's going really well. Our first session on May 14th produced really great working versions of our mission and vision, as well as a set of 7 key focus areas. Staff then grouped themselves into smaller teams for each focus area and came up with roughly 3 to 5 associated goals. We then got back together as a group this past Wednesday to share out those goals and to create a working draft. We will then be briefing board members, revising them, and getting their feedback prior to our next strategic planning session, which will be held on June 11th. Team and the board have done a great job collaborating on this initiative, and we are excited to focus next on defining our core values and goal setting. So as a preview, during our next regular board meeting in June, we hope to adopt our mission, vision, values, and goals. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for the general?
No, I just wanted to acknowledge and just thank our new CEO and also our board chair. I was really impressed with the board retreat. And I thought it was a very, very consensus-driven and collaborative process. And I really liked the way it was conducted and carried out. And I appreciate, we actually got a lot of work done. So I appreciate the follow-up with our staff. So thank you very much. And you're off to a great start. And I really appreciate it's not easy to come into a new team, it's a new startup, but you've done a great job of, I think, really helping and being a perfect fit into this sort of collaborative, consensus-driven culture we have here, which is very nice to see.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the next session where we actually include the staff and their CAC. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have some team building exercises, and we're in an aquatic center, so I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe some swimming contest or something like that, but we'll see. It's going to be fun. All right, so General Counsel Ryan.
I have nothing to report, Mr. Chair. I apologize, I can't be there. My whole family's sick, and I don't think I want to spread what we have. So.
All right. Well, it's good that you're not here if you have COVID, and it's good that our General Counsel reports.
No, it's good that even if you don't have COVID, I so appreciate staying home when you're sick and not getting anyone else sick. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's not COVID. It's strep is going around up here.
Oh, great.
All right. We don't want strep either. All right, director comments, and this is an opportunity for directors to make any comments they have, and also if they have thoughts on items that they want to hear on our agenda for the future. This could be an opportunity to put forth those ideas for a future agenda. Any hands?
Hold on, let's think. Give us a second.
She's like, okay, this is what I want this time. This is.
I guess I want to say I think you all are doing an amazing job. I'm really impressed. Really excited to be on this board, and just really looking forward to the program ideas coming forward and the strategic plan evolving. So thank you to the staff.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's go around. Did you want to say anything?
I just did.
All right. All right, perfect. Joe, Director LaCava.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. My kudos to Karen. Really, I think already exceeding expectations and in terms of coming on board and how fast you're moving. And thank you very much. Very much appreciated. I'll mention that at the city's Environment Committee, we heard a presentation on the county's decarbonization plan. And if you haven't heard that, I would certainly encourage you to hear what the county's doing for kind of a regional approach. It was very powerful. We also heard a presentation from our favorite investor-owned utility, SDG&E, on their path to net zero. Got some pointed questions from my colleagues on the committee, and really said, "Hey, you're interested in 100% renewable. Don't look at us anymore. It's all about San Diego Community Power." So it was kind of a very interesting presentation. Anyway, kudos on the strategic session we had last week. Look forward to the next one. It is really exciting to be working with all of you on creating this. And thank you, Chair Mosca, for never giving up on trying to make that strategic sessions happen. It's really proven itself out. So thank you.
Thank you, Director LaCava. Director Sotelo Solis.
So just really quick, kind of going on the same thing with Ryan, potentially our household was exposed to somebody with COVID-19. We've gone out and taken tests. So we are also too on lockdown by choice. We don't want to, if anybody is sick, we want to make sure that everybody stays healthy. But I would echo the sentiment of member Lawson Reamer. Well done. Good job. Keep going. We're gonna get there to being what we already are, fabulous. But I think to where the numbers are gonna continue to grow, and we're gonna show everyone else in the state how effective we are with the strong and mighty team. So adelante team.
Awesome. And I agree with all of the comments about our staff and everything that we've done so far. I've enjoyed working with Karen, and she's getting up to speed pretty quickly, so that's great. I did want to call out Kimberly, who is always organizing and trying to manage all the schedules, which is not easy. And so thank you for everything you do.
My pleasure.
And thank you for organizing the next planning session as well. So thank you.
Let's frame it. We're saving the planet, we're making our communities better, and we're improving the economy for all. Triple win, gold medal.
Yeah.
Yay. Very great.
All right. If there are no other comments or agenda items for the next meeting, we will adjourn. We'll close this meeting down. All right. We're adjourned.
Great. Thank you.